Good evening and welcome to the Master Talk, an initiative of Instituto Diplomacia. This program brings together diplomacy, scholarship, and lived experience, offering a space for serious conversation on war, peace, and international responsibility. Tonight, it's a privilege to welcome Dr. SOREN ASHMALL, a decorated United States Marine Corps officer, a scholar of security studies, and a colleague whose integrity and experience I deeply respect. SOREN, as a veteran, as a scholar, and as a friend, welcome to tonight's Master Talk.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciate being here.
So I first saw it as an international observer. I'm talking about war. I witnessed the devastating misery of war in Sarajevo in the mid-1990s. Before that, I had already worked and been in other conflict zones in different parts of the tumultuous 1990s. So when I boarded a bus in Split, or Spalatov, as it is pronounced in Croatian, crossing the border from Croatia into Bosnia, heading into Sarajevo, I was confident, very confident indeed. I thought I was prepared for the task to go. I thought I was prepared to observe, documenting, and reporting what I had seen and what I was about to see. I was wrong. Completely wrong. I was already a graduate historian. I had experience on the ground, in the field. I had studied histories. I had patterns. I knew. And I have seen violence before. I have seen political breakdown before. So I thought I was prepared. But no book had prepared me. My body, my brain, biochemical process that interpreting reality to the unbearable. That smell, horrible smell of human bodies in decomposition. Back at the Holiday Inn Hotel, or what remember of it.
Yeah, the remains of it, yeah.
I took shower after shower, and it still was there. In my hair, in the air, all around me. That smell has hunted me for decades. War is terrible, quite more terrible than those who had not experienced it in the field could imagine. Then policymakers, head of states, in the comfort of their palaces around the world could imagine. I tried to erase some images from my mind, First, I tried that without a psychiatrist, regular psychiatric help and regular psychiatric medication. And once again, I was wrong. It didn't work. And that is why I profoundly respect those who talk about war and peace, having experienced both. Those who talk with the authority and that have that in their body's memory and in their memories.
Yeah.
That is the point, Dr. Ashmall, that I move into having you in this first master talk. We know that you, beyond a scholar, a decorated scholar, is also a decorated officer of the United States Marine Corps. And I know also that you have served in the Gulf War.
Mm-hmm.
So I would like to start by asking you what kind of advice you would have to give to these audience of us, of ours, made by current and future diplomats. What
Yeah, well,
what war truly is in the field, and after all that, what peace? What does peace mean? Welcome. Sorry.
hey, thank you very much, Nita. I very much appreciate being here and having the opportunity to chat with you, and then of course hopefully provide some information and some advice that that your students can use. I do have to start to say that I am a retired Marine Corps officer. I did serve over 21 years. I retired from the United States Marine Corps back in 2009. And so as that, I do have to say that my opinions are my personal opinions. And that may sound strange to say to an international audience, but in the United States, I have to say that. I have to make it clear that these are my personal opinions, because once you are commissioned as an officer, especially a senior officer, even though you are retired, you are still responsible for what you say and how you say it and all that kind of good stuff. I'm not on active duty. I am thoroughly retired after 21 plus years on active duty, but I am required to say that. About war, it is truly, I believe, the ugly underbelly of the world. When everything else fails, for whatever reason, which is obviously when diplomacy fails, when the ability of nations or people, the nations always come down to the individuals that are talking or not talking, who are trusted or not trusted. When that all fails, that's when the military is called in. And that is when we end up with a war. And for those that have been in it, it is an ugly place. You see friends die, you see people, just torn apart in very, very ugly ways. And there is a smell, as you mentioned, that just never goes away. You'll never forget it. It is different than just a dead animal, which is not good either. But there's just something about a dead human being, and then it makes you wonder, why did it come to this? Why couldn't it have been solved some other way? But as an officer in the United States military, when you're called in, and particularly in the United States Marine Corps, once you've received your orders to go in and do what you need to do, then that is what you do. It's not a time for debate. It's not a time for questioning. It is a time for action, because the diplomatic community has in fact failed, and that it has failed miserably. And it, for those that might think war is what they see in a movie, or they they felt a little uncomfortable in seeing a certain film or a certain TV series. That is but a slight fraction of how you're going to feel in real life. And before you get to the point of feeling that diplomacy has to stop, then you should think about, do you want either your son or daughter, your closest friend, the people that you know and love, and even the people you don't like, to end up being die in some really horrible way. And that's something that I think most diplomats don't think about. And as they become more senior, at least from what I've observed, the personalities tend to grow, and they tend to have, maybe a lot of confidence in what they do, but then there's also a lot of ego. And from what I've seen, the ego can get in the way of, coming to some sort of resolution, some sort of agreement, some sort of relationship that could have avoided the need for a military to come in. And when it's the United States, because of the way the world is, it is going to be extremely powerful, and it will be used not to kind of have like some sort of firefight dance. It will be used in a way that is meant to kill, and it is meant to destroy, and it is meant to accomplish whatever that mission is. So the application of military force really should be well thought out. Is that really what either you want to have happen, and even worse, do you want it to have happen to your country? Because it's easy to think of war as being some far off place, maybe a few images here and there. At least in the United States, some people might see a little bit of it while they're having dinner, or while they're streaming on their device, and it just doesn't feel real. It'll feel very real if you're there. It'll feel very real if you are wounded in some horrific way, and it will feel very real if it's somebody who you love, or a close friend that you've really gotten to know, or maybe even somebody you just met that just seems to have a bright future, that 1 second exists and the next second doesn't. So I would offer that up to folks that are going to be diplomats, that particularly as you get more senior, not to let your confidence in yourself and the ego that all of us have at some point as we get better and better at what we do, to not get in the way of finding a way to avoid war. It is really, as I mentioned, to begin with, the ugly underbelly of the world. It is something that unfortunately happens, and more often than not, at least in my opinion, you would have hoped there would have been a way to avoid it and not have it there. But at least when the United States military is involved, it will be employed in a very dramatic and in a very complete way. And it has to be done that way. That's the way that people come back from war that have been forced into doing it. And it is not a time at that point for debate and debating about political systems and what's right and wrong. Those military personnel have a mission, and whatever that is, they are sent in to do something, and to do it well, and to bring as many people home as they possibly can.
Thank you, Soren. Let me take these experience and move it into a broader analytical perspective.
Sure.
You said about egos, and part of the international relations theory, of the history of international relations theories, brings us to a French theory that says that you have to understand international relations from two pillars. On one side, the head of state, l'homme d'État. And on the other side, the profound force, So the first thing is related to the prince. The prince, his ego, his formation, his values. And the second principle is based on the system, the structure that has been part of many different kind of social analysis of structure, system against agency.
Mhm.
And theoretically speaking, so, but keeping this ego thing in the center of this talk, how do you see that? We said that about diplomatic failure. War comes when diplomacy fails.
Yeah.
But ego of the head of the state
Mhm.
sometimes could understand or have a different understanding of when diplomacy has failed. How do you see from where you are seated and from your theoretical conception and analysis, how do you see the role of the head of the state in preventing war and promoting peace?
Well, I believe that obviously that is that is something that we all hope that our elected leaders, embody that there's not a rush to war, because once, at least in the United States, the president is the head. He's the commander in chief, and so those orders go straight down, even if they're delegated, in terms of the plans to to the Secretary of Defense, or now what's called the Secretary of War, and they are then executed by the United States military or whatever part of the government is appropriate. You always hope that the ego of any world leader, for that matter, is not front and center. However, you have to realize that most, at least in the United States, most people get elected based on, not only their qualifications, but in many cases, their personality. And that, even in a very divided election like those that have been in the United States recently, there's some people that like, bravado, and there's some people that really likes a strong figure coming in who may also, embody some things that others might think is very egotistical. But there's been a period where there's either been economic stagnation or economic problems, and at least in history, and I don't believe this is, restricted to the United States. When somebody comes in and says, "Look, I have a plan, and I can fix it, and I am the person, in some ways, the greatest person that can come in and do that," it can be very enticing to a lot of people. And then, at least in the United States, they've got 4 years to either have people agree with them and reelect them or not. Our current president did not get reelected. Initially, he waited 4 years for a different administration, and they got reelected when there was a series of economic problems. And then, as a leader that's been elected, you're going off of who you are. And, the more you get elected, more people tend to become more confident. And then usually with that confidence is a level of ego. And that sometimes translates into the things that they do. Now, we always hope that no matter how much is there, that every decision will be made, very carefully and very judiciously, especially as it affects other nations and their people. But I think history is full of cases when that has not happened. Some that have been horrific, and others that are controversial at the minimum. But there have been ones that have been horrific, where it's been up to the point of being a cult of a personality that gets this massive amount of support. In the United States, there are some that might consider our president that way, but then there are others that definitely don't consider him that way. They think that he's doing the right thing, and I'm not coming down on one side or the other. I'm just trying to, for an audience that doesn't live in the United States, explain that we have a country that had a very close election, and there are very divided opinions, but the party that is in power in the United States is the Republican Party, and the president is from that party, and both houses of our Congress are controlled by that party. That doesn't mean that everything he's going to do is just going to be done carte blanche in terms of legislation and all of that, but he is still the commander in chief and does have the ability to use the military in different ways. And sometimes that gets into realms where people can debate whether is it war or is it not war. I'll tell you, for the person who's executing any kind of operation, if somebody's shooting back at you, that is a war. It may not be declared a war, but when somebody is trying to kill you, that is very personal and it's very immediate, and that is a war. It may be a very short one for you, and it may be yours, and everybody else might consider it a certain type of an action or a certain thing to happen. But to the person that is trying to be killed, that those actions, those incidents, those events are the same as a war. Now, if it's a specific action where you go in, you do something, and then you come out, you hope to bring everybody back alive, and you hope that it's over short. But what most people miss is that it is a very violent clash, and it is just like in a full-scale war. You have your war is what's immediate to you, and that is there are people trying to kill you, and you are trying to do the same to them to avoid going home in a body bag.
Thank you, Soren. And again, making all the way back, going through theoretic perspective to more practical perspective, we first talked about ego and the head of state, and how does it can impact on peace or war. But we also have institutions.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding institutions in a broader sense, and including law, international law on human rights, international law on the use of force, international humanitarian law that tries to separate combatant from non-combatants, all that, and you have institutions like the UN Security Council. We've got institutions as the UN itself, and many other institutions. But talking about international, we are writing an article together, and in this article, I wrote in the draft of this article, I wrote down the idea that you could give a historical perspective to today's situation. So I was considering this article a pendulum, like a spectrum of 3 moments. On one extreme, we have the situation we are living now. And in our other extreme, we have a law-abiding global order or global system. And in the middle, we have something in between, that is a kind of disrespect to law, but still I count on law. I use international law to justify my international behavior. And I was thinking, as we are writing this article, just letting the audience know on it, updating them on it, that you could have, from the part of the United States, focus on the United States, we have at the beginning of the post-Cold War time, in Mr. President George Bush, the father administration, when we have the United States went to war in the Persian Gulf. You were there. And George Bush, he did that, and he was very concerned about being law-abiding, doing lawful things. So, as we know, I won't go through these basic things on international law that the UN Charter just make law illegal, except for two situations: self-defense, legitimate defense, and under the UN Security Council collective resolution. Any other kind of war is a crime. So consider that after the World War II, and consider that World War II and that resulting in the criminalization of war. We could say that George Bush and the Gulf War was an example of optimism in the post-Cold War, in the early post-Cold War. You couldn't even say post-Cold War. It is very early, because when the United States went to the Iraq, Soviet Union was still there for some months later. It was in August 1991 and 1990 or 91. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
And, the beginning of the Gulf War was in August 1990 or 1991. 1990, if I'm not wrong. And Soviet Union was still there. In December, it would be dissolved. And so because of it, maybe you could say is the last shining light of the Cold War time. But at the very beginning of the post-Cold War time, George Bush and the United States in this time was trying to make things, to do things in a lawful way. And if you move to his son as administration, when we have the Iraq War in 2003, 2003, there was not the same attempt in doing things under the UN Charter, under the law, international law framework. But at least those administrations tried to build up a kind of alternative law with the idea of preemptive war. And the US moved and put into action many scholars from the US and out of the US to try to set up in the scholarly environment and also in popular opinion, the idea that there would be a third legal way of going to war. That would be the preemptive war. Also, a certain respect to law, even when I disrespect law. But now we would come to moving from the middle part of this spectrum and coming to its opposite extreme. We would say that we have not a law-abiding moment, not an illegal but reflexive law system. We would have a law indifference. It is third pattern of law indifference. Of course, it has not started in in the US and in today's administration. I could see, for example, and I do agree with a senior diplomat that is a professor here, an ambassador, a retired ambassador, that 2014, the Crimea War taken by Putin was indeed when this law indifference start. But Russia is not the founder of today's international system. Even we consider that Russia is the heir of the Soviet Union. You know that Soviet Union have been brought into this system due to the end of the war scenario, due to the need of fighting against Nazi Germany and have a victory. But the US and the UK, on the other hand, played a central, crucial, foundational role in today's international law framework. And I do agree with Ambassador Paulo Roberto de Almeida that Putin was the pioneer in these law indifference times of Poland. But when it comes to the US and the historical role that the US has played, do you believe that what happened in Venezuela in January the 3rd, today in Brazil is a remarkable day. It's our January the 6th. Because the attempt of coup is happened 2 years ago in January the 8th. But you could say that January the 3rd, when the U.S. military has abducted the sitting president, not discussing about legitimacy or illegitimacy, but discussing that he was the seated president of Venezuela and taking him to the United States. Or the military operation, we don't know yet of the full complexity what have happening there, but we did know some numbers today that it was, even the government provided us with some info, like more than 150 war aircraft. So knowing these, do you think that this recent fact in Venezuela could have a deeper impact on international security and peace than Putin or other events that are happening in this post-Cold War era? We think that Venezuela is a new chapter, or it's just one more chapter of this story?
First, I'll apologize for some of my dogs barking in the background. So I hope I hope that doesn't distract from the talk. I think the events in Venezuela are seen in a couple of different ways, at least in the United States. There are those that see it as more of a law enforcement action, even though it was a sitting president, but that he was using his country in much the same way that Manuel Noriega used his country in Panama. Not that the two are very different, but there is a view here in the United States that you had a president who is using his power and his presidency to really funnel illegal drugs into the United States. So there are in the United States, there are those that think, it was maybe a good thing. And then there are those that are concerned about what sort of precedent it sets. Although you could say, if you're looking at precedents like you're talking about, certainly here you could talk about the the military action in Panama to remove Manuel Noriega and arrest him and bring him to trial and incarceration in the United States. And then there are those that do compare that to, many of the actions that Putin has taken. And so because we have very divided politics here, you will find a lot of folks that, fall on both sides of that discussion. But, as probably you've heard in Venezuela, the official U.S. position is while it did use military force, it was to arrest somebody who had violated U.S. law through their use of their office as the presidency in Venezuela. And I'm not trying to simplify it, but that is the general gist of how it's done here, and about how a number of people think about it in the United States. I personally have not seen, except on the party that's not in power, that, there's a huge outcry about it. There's concern that it maybe, is, potentially causing us to become more entrenched in Venezuela and all of its problems that it has. But then there's another feeling that the country nationalized assets that did belong to U.S. companies, and that this is part of taking that back and also arresting somebody who's been a international narco terrorist. So I know that's not a widely held view across the country, the world. But it's certainly, when working with the United States, and certainly with the current administration, that has to be at the forefront, because if you come in thinking that everybody here is up in arms over it, that's really not the case. I don't think people are indifferent, but they are not feeling that, this is imperialism, U.S. imperialism reemerging. That there are folks that don't believe that. They just think that it's taking care of a problem that was kind of like a two-headed monster. It was one, a narco-terrorist who was using his country and his power, through the instruments of government to funnel illegal drugs into the United States and make a lot of money over it. And then also to reverse the action of the nationalization of the oil assets that were owned in the past by U.S. companies. So I know that there's a lot there in your question. I can go back to World War II, and what the Soviets did and didn't do. They ultimately became part of the United Nations. So and as everybody knows, it was created because the League of Nations didn't do what it needed to do. It did not avoid a world war. You jump to the Gulf War, the first Gulf War. It was the dying days of the Soviet Union, but the Soviets and now the Russians, they knew pretty much what was going to happen and did nothing to stop it. They were not enamored of the regime in Iraq at that time. Matter of fact, there are different events, but one of them was, the very cruel behavior that dictator and his sons, how they behaved with a famous Russian dancer and her husband when they came to perform, which was just a pretext for, some sort of rape and physical abuse. So, the Russians, had, I think, more than one, problem with that administration. And frankly, you think, well, why does two people, and it's a dancer, and why is that a big deal? But, the Russians and the Soviets took great pride in their dancers, and still do. And so it was seen as a slap in the face of what had traditionally been an ally of the Iraqi government. So we can kind of jump to a number of the issues, but with Venezuela, the way it's viewed here, I do believe is probably viewed differently, because our current government views it as a law enforcement action that did cross borders and did require the application of force. And I know a lot of people don't agree with that around the world, and are concerned. But that is the justification that's being used. And I agree with you. You don't see the same approach that maybe George H.W. Bush, the elder Bush, used, when he was taking actions. But then you can also argue that when he went into Panama, that there are some similarities. So yes, he as a past diplomat, as a past ambassador, particularly to China, he did try to take more diplomatic action to try and garner support and explain what was going on. But ultimately, he did take military action against Panama. And George W. Bush, not so much on going to the United Nations and getting all these different countries involved and all of that, but he also took action too. So I think there is a huge difference of views. That's not to say that there aren't people in the United States that feel the exact same way that many people around the world feel right now. But in working with the United States and some of its allies, for that matter, I would say for those that are becoming diplomats, not to assume that your view in your country or even in your embassy is the view that is shared by either the country that you're, working with, or the countries that you may be working in the future. I did notice one person had asked a question about how diplomats could de-escalate effectively before, weapons, guns, meaning the military is deployed. And I think my personal opinion is it's a long-term process. I think the more that countries are engaged with each other at all levels. So I think diplomacy goes well beyond, those that are diplomats on each side. It's the exchange of personnel. It's people visiting the country, getting to know each other in so many ways and in so many cultural exchanges that is one way to help avoid us ever getting to the point where military force or one side if particularly feels that military force has to be used. But sometimes I think for a variety of reasons, it could be the ego of the leaders. Their countries are going to take action and have a justification for it. Whether it's Russia and what it's been doing, or whether it's the United States and feeling, from an official position that the actions were justified and that they were as limited as they could be without endangering more people. So that, I know this is not a global perspective on how it's viewed, but I think it's important to kind of understand what does potentially the other side think before you come in hot and heavy about how, this is just another U.S. imperialist action and how terrible it is, because I don't think you're going to find that's the way that the United States government feels about it right now. And if your goal is to bridge understanding, then you at least have to understand the other person's point of view.
Thank you, Soren. We are open for these live is open for questions, and you had a question here. So before moving to Europe and some other issues, we got this question here. Mrs.
I think I just answered this one.
Yes.
And if somebody feels I didn't answer that, then you can kind of tailor it a little bit more if I didn't touch on the points that you were interested in.
Okay. Do you have another question, dear Luis, who is assisting us? No, I think just this one for now. No. Okay. So, sorry. Let's move to Europe. We are talking about the Western. When we talk about Venezuela, we are talking about the Western Hemisphere, and ultimately we're talking about Latin America.
Right.
But when we look from the European perspective, how do you see Europe role in the post-Cold War system and their contribution to either promoting peace or preventing war.
Sure. I think that, again, these are all my personal opinions and my personal opinions about what I see, here with the United States government. But I believe in the United States, there's been a feeling for quite a number of years, and it's not just one administration, the current administration, that we've seen a number of European countries reducing their military spending, and so they could shift money over somewhere else, and figuring, okay, well, we can do that because the United States is there, and we don't have to spend that money because the United States will spend it. And I think there's been more than one administration that's been concerned about that. I think the administration that's been the most vocal about it is our current government administration in the United States, and probably more aggressive about speaking out against it. President Trump did talk about it in his first term, but he wasn't the only one that was concerned that, maybe we were paying more than our fair share to help keep Europe safe. And so I think you can argue both sides about, should the issue have been brought up the way that it's been brought up more recently? Was there a kinder, gentler way to do it? I think you can argue both points, or you can argue the point to say that, maybe it needed to be as brash and as forceful in order to get everyone's attention. And then, of course, you've got, the war in Ukraine, which starts to drive it home, particularly for the Europeans, that, that there could be a major power that wants to reclaim territory that it used to exist as part of the Soviet Union. And that Ukraine maybe is the first, piece of that. Or maybe Crimea was the first piece, and then, the rest of Ukraine or part of it is the next piece. So I think it was in some way it was inevitable that European countries, and I broaden that to include the UK, even though it's not in Europe, but that would have to rethink about how much of their nation's budget would need to go to defense, and how that defense feeds into NATO or bilateral agreements or bilateral alliances or trilateral alliances, however which way those countries prefer to look at it. That eventually they were going to have to realize that, going from 5% GDP to down to like 1.5% or 2.5% is probably not going to continue to be acceptable to all parties in the alliance, particularly in the United States, over the long term. I don't think the United States ever really had a problem with them, with how much money was spent to make sure that that Nazi Germany was defeated, and that the countries that had been taken over were freed. That was never an issue. There were some Lend-Lease actions, with both the Soviet Union and the UK, where certain amounts needed to be paid back because that was the agreement. But the vast amount of money that was spent by the United States to free Europe from Nazism was borne by the United States and its people. But there was never a problem with that. I mean, the United States made a very conscious decision to do that. But here we are, 80 plus years from that, and is it right for every one of those countries to continue to reduce their spending on defense and their alliances, in terms of, what are you actually putting forward? Is that the right thing that should be done now? And I think there's been, quietly in the past, and now not so quietly, a feeling in the United States that Europe needed to pay more of its fair share. And the United States continues to pay a huge amount and has not as many troops and forces stationed in those countries, but certainly has forces constantly deployed in and around Europe, with carrier battle groups and with Marine expeditionary units. So that's a combination of the United States Marines and the Navy, which are in the United States are two separate forces. But they join together and get on ships to be available at a moment's notice, so to speak, to respond to crises. So even if you argue, well, the United States has pulled out so many troops over the last 80 years, yeah, they have. But the United States also has spends a lot of money keeping its military available just in case some country decides it wants to cross the border that it should not have crossed. So I know that's a very wide-ranging way of answering the question, but I did want to cover at least a few of those points.
Thank you, Dr. Soren. Western Hemisphere. The concept is not something very familiar for many Latin American ordinary women and men on the street, like the British say, men on the streets. Now we are more used to, like, for example, South America, North America, Central America, or Anglo-Saxon America and Latin America. But now, since the United States was who has coined these terms, I remember Professor Leslie Bethel, who has visited two universities that I was, by chance, I was working, Universidade de Brasília, and then in Georgetown University. And I had some talks about with Dr. Leslie Bethel, and he was doing in Washington a research on the concept of Western Hemisphere, and when does it appear? When Latin America, all these concepts have come up, and he ended up by the conclusion that Western Hemisphere had been coined by the U.S. Department of State in the last years of the World Wars II, and they, in the way they are dividing the sectors and divisions inside the Department of State. So they created that Western Hemisphere. And now we are getting more used to these concepts down here and the other bank of the Rio Grande. And but we also know that these concepts, or at least as it is in the Department of State, divisions and sectors, administrative departments, it also includes Greenland. And when you have Greenland is, by definition, part of the Western Hemisphere. And these bring us into a breach between European affairs, US affairs, and Latin America affairs and Brazil's affairs. So how do you see Greenland in the context of the current administration discourse and speech?
Well, I think for most Americans, they were surprised that there was, by anyone in the government, a discussion about purchasing Greenland. That was a surprise. I don't think anyone's been under the impression that it's for sale. Obviously, I mean, in an alternate universe, would it be great for the United States to have all the resources that exist in Greenland and have this other, like, new state or new territory in some way, probably, yes, maybe, I don't know. I try not to be too tongue in cheek with that because, it did get a lot of people upset, and it certainly got certain Europeans upset, and they made it very clear. Both those in Greenland and in Europe made it very clear. It's not for sale. I do not know what the impetus for that is. And again, these are all my personal opinions. I don't know what the impetus for that was. I don't know if there was some, tertiary or secondary reason for coming up with that. I do know it caught a lot of people by surprise here, including folks that I know work in the government, as well as those that, it's just your average everyday American, at least those living and working in the Washington, D.C. area. And for those that aren't really familiar with the area, that there's Washington, D.C., and then there's 3 states basically that surround it, and 2 primarily, but then there's another one that's very close. And within driving distance. Actually, there are 3 or 4 that are within driving distance, depending on how long you want to have a commute in this area. So I know in Brazil, there are nice big cities with horrific commutes as well. But I think it really caught a lot of people by surprise. And a lot of people are like, do we really want to buy Greenland? I mean, is that something or was that tongue in cheek? Or was he really serious about that? I don't know. I really don't know. I was as caught by surprise, I think, as probably everybody around the world was it. I have a feeling that there was some other reason for making a statement like that is not really the purchase of Greenland, but it's something else. And what it is, I've scratched my head. I don't know. I really don't know. But even if something set off the cuff, and maybe I don't know if that was or if that was pre-planned, there's usually a reason. No matter how stacked up or broken apart the logic is, there's usually a reason for somebody saying that, and there's usually a calculation in it. I think what's different right now is that, given the position of the United States in the world, is that not only the American people, but also folks around the world are not used to something like that being said. And when I first heard it, I thought somebody was pulling my leg. I thought they were joking. And I said, well, I mean, why would we want to buy Greenland? I mean, it's a very nice place, and it's beautiful and all that. But I mean, I'm not quite sure, what our interest is there. I do know it has natural minerals and all of that, but I don't think we're really interested in creating some sort of like countrywide mining operation. I don't understand. But my gut tells me that there was another reason. And I'm just, if it's okay, I'll before they get too far down, I'll see if I can answer some of the questions. I think one I can barely see. Let's see. One question is, saw comments that the international order is being reshaped in the image of 19th century configuration. Do I agree with that? Personally, I don't agree with that. It's far more complex. You can't take China out of the equation. You can make an argument maybe in the 19th century that there were some similarities, but I mean, just look what happened with China during the 19th century. And frankly, in the United States and a lot of Western countries, we don't know too much about what many of the Chinese will say are the 8 powers that came in and invaded, particularly Beijing, and then went to the Forbidden City and were scraping the gold off of the many of the items there. But I don't think there's a natural match. I think it's far more complicated now, and I think if you try and simplify it to U.S. imperialism or any labels like that, from where I sit, I don't think that's accurate. Is the U.S. a major power? Yes, and it will continue to be Does everybody like the way that that power is being wielded? Is everybody in the world like that? Clearly, no. But I do think it's a different dynamic. I think trying to map it back to the 19th century is too much of a simplification. And certainly, if that were proposed, I think to most Americans, particularly those in the government, they would just kind of look at it and go, you don't really understand what's going on. That's not right. And again, whether it is or isn't, it's just understanding what the other side thinks. So hopefully that answers the question. The next one is, how do you see the influence in the region in the current conflicts? Catholics, Protestants, and then Orthodox versus non-Orthodox. The United States, we are a melting pot, but also when you have lots of different people, lots of different faiths. I mean, we have, just like many countries, we have flare-ups and problems and issues. But the United States does not tend to look at, the world as being major conflicts between major religions. We might see certain Arab states being predominantly influenced by Islam. But I think particularly now there's at least overall a better understanding that, not all Arabs are the same. Not all Muslims are the same. There are extremists in every faith, just like there are, across, Christian faiths and other faiths. So I don't think that, that I think that's another simplification, and certainly not the way that I believe that most Americans see it. I mean, I think we try to be conscious of places where that is the issue. But in the United States, I don't think that we tend to view everything through that prism. And I think a lot of the Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, and you could argue that some of the recent events in the United States maybe are against this, but I think a lot of that has been worked through. I think that as a result of the wars that we fought and the operations that we've done, I think we are far more informed than maybe we were at the beginning of the Gulf War, where most parts of the United States, I mean, there were parts of I think of the State Department understood it, but, understanding what a Sunni Muslim, thinks versus others. I mean, that was not real clear across the United States. I think as a result of our time there and the alliances that have, become strengthened since then, as well as those that we've tried to build and those that we're working through. I think there's a far clearer understanding of that. And we don't tend to see things as, Catholic versus Protestant like they might in Ireland, even to this day. So I hope that, yeah.
Sorry for interrupt you. We have just crossed the 1 hour line, and we like moving to finish this talk. But before that, we still having some questions here. One is, Doctor, the U.S.'s military budget has been recently increased in 50%. That and the shift from the defense to a War Department signal to the world that more friction is to be expected. What is your opinion?
I don't think one leads to the other. My personal opinion, I don't think one leads to the other. There's a lot that goes into the United States military budget that is more than the military. There's a lot that's in that particular part of the budget. The renaming the Department of Defense, the War Department. I mean, it's going back to what it was in World War II. Are we trying to send a signal to the world that we'll be more interventionist or not? I don't know. I the way I see it, my personal opinion is that we're probably taking with the administration that was elected by a majority of Americans, we're probably taking the actions that we would otherwise. I don't know if 50% is 100% correct, but there's a lot that goes into that. It's not just weapons and planes and men and all of that. If you're not familiar with the U.S. military budget, it is far more complex than that and includes a lot of stuff that you might not otherwise think is in a military budget, and is not a direct map that other countries have. They would break out other things that we put in all of that. So I don't think that it's a signal that there's more friction to be expected. However, maybe maybe that the U.S. will take more action, whereas in the past it might not have. So I don't see it as friction. I see it as maybe being a little bit bolder in trying to, at least with the way the current government feels, to correct actions that should have been corrected before. So, I'm not trying to split hairs on that. I don't think it's friction. I think it's trying to fix things that maybe should have been fixed before.
Dr. Soren, just clarify something. When
Yeah.
Dr. Dr. Ashmall talks about budget, he knows what he's talking about. Dr. Soren, could you just share with our audience, we don't need to go in further details,
Yeah.
your experience managing the U.S. Marine Corps budget?
Yeah, and this goes to the question about my experience. My experience is not in the United States Navy; it's in the United States Marine Corps. That is a completely separate service in the United States, and has been since 1972. We are under the Department of Navy, so we have some similar administrative offices and all of that. But in terms of presence on the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which is the leaders of all of the U.S. military services, they're all co-equals, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff recently has seen a number of military of United States Marine Corps officers serve in that role. So, but in terms of budget, I was doing the budget for the United States Marine Corps intelligence, all of the budgeting that supports the intelligence operations within the United States Marine Corps, and then from there I was pulled in to help in a group that helps manage and promote the budget for the entire United States Marine Corps, which involved, in both parts, but particularly with the intelligence side, involved briefing committee members and staffers who worked in the two houses of the United States Congress, both the House of Representatives as well as the United States Senate. So, in the House of Representatives, it's called the HPSI, the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. That's one where that work is done, and then in the United States Senate, there's a committee that's called the SISI, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. So that they're all acronyms where we take the words and then make something up, that kind of sounds like the letters. But yeah, I did that for quite a few years. I spent a long time at Headquarters Marine Corps here in Washington, D.C. as an active duty officer, a senior active duty officer, and had a lot of work with that. So, I became very familiar without breaching any of the responsibilities that I have to keep things, forever quiet until somebody else decides to release them. But there's no secret that there's a lot in our budget. And you would probably expect that of any major power that, has as much of a military and much of a presence that we had. I did see somebody talking about my assessment of the alleged decline of the United States. I think a decline, and, I'm not taking the bait on that one. I know that's kind of you're putting the hook out there to see if I'm going to get all worked up or something like that. If you think it's a decline, that's a perception, and everybody's allowed to have their own perception and their own opinion. But I think you can ask whether or not is the decline in influence. Is there really a decline in influence? Is there an increase in certain areas? Is it just a shifting? Is it a strategy? Is there a decline because you become bolder and take more action? and maybe people don't like that, and they see, well, it's a decline because I don't like them anymore. So I just offer to, with things like that, please, look at it in multiple ways. And just because, maybe it's a popular thought in one place, it's not necessarily true, and it's not necessarily global.
Dr. Ashimul, going all the way back now from practical experience into a more analytical, a broader analytical perspective, one of the former U.S. Department of State employee, and who is also one of the greatest U.S. Thinker and international on the field of international relations, Joseph Nye, wrote a famous book, article, where we extract the notion what is power, and power is the ability to make a nation has to make another nation to do what they don't want to do, or the ability to make nation A makes nation B to wish and to want the same thing nation A wants and wishes. So he divided that into a very well-known concept of hard power and soft power. All members of these audience know about this concept. And so when you're having this question from one of our audience, a member, on the decline of the United States, would that apply to the notion of softer power? Is the United States having its ability to make other nations to want the same the U.S. wants less powerful? Is the U.S. soft power less powerful due to the recent U.S. actions in the international scene?
Yeah, I think that there's, for a long time, the United States engaged in soft power. I mean, I think that's what, especially, after World War II, and, we had the Korean War, and we had the Vietnam War, and then, of course, we have the Gulf War, and there's a number of things that happened in between, certainly with Panama. But I think that the world got used to a lot of soft power, and it was not as used to the United States using hard power. And I think that there's probably more use of hard power now, either in rhetoric and words, but as well as with military power. And you can argue both sides. Does that make you more or less powerful? Does the soft power enable the hard power to be more effective, or are they really just two different things? And is the amount of money you have to spend on soft power worth it at a certain point in history? Clearly, the United States government has made a choice to reduce at least the funding for a lot of soft power. The U.S. AID budget, and other budgets were significantly cut. And that, you could argue, was a big part of soft power. But I really do think soft power goes far beyond whether or not the United States is spending money in this country to build wells or to fund exchanges. I think there's many more ways that soft power can be demonstrated. And does it take more work? Yeah. And you could argue you're just shifting money from one place to the other. But I think that, saying that things have declined or you don't have as much power is I think it becomes a little shrill. and how those kind of arguments tend to be made, and oh my gosh, they've lost their power because they're doing X or Y or Z. And I would argue that in some ways, if you're looking at power, then you have to decide for your personal opinion, how do you measure it? How do you measure power? If it's all soft power, and a major nation reduces the amount of money it spends on that, well, is that a loss of power or not? Or have they shifted how they're using their soft power, or have they shifted, the priorities in the use of soft power? And is there more diplomatic work that's being done by money just being spent on things and projects around the world? I'm not arguing one way or the other, but I just offer to think about it in a much broader way and not simplify too much. I think where we all get in trouble, and I've argued this, even when I was on active duty, that if you think of another nation in a very simplified way, you are probably not accurately describing them. Whether you agree with what they do or not, the simplifications generally lead to something less than peace.
Thank you, sir.
And it's just and I think that's a shame. It's very easy and this includes Americans, very easy to get wrapped up in where you are and what you think and how you think, and to try and simplify something in another country and not really understand the nuances and the complexities that are part of that. And I think if you're a smart person, but even more so a smart diplomat, that you want to have an understanding of that complexity and an understanding of all those nuances, so you don't make a mistake yourself, and that maybe you can build those figurative bridges with a country, and maybe using your soft power to help influence maybe a power that's bigger than you or smaller than you. Because I certainly think diplomacy can be a part of soft power.
Thank you, Dr. Soren. Dr. Ashmall, I have to do the horrible role of the timekeeper, and
Okay,
our classes it lasts for.
Yeah, we probably ran way over.
No, we aren't. It's late. It takes 90 minutes.
Okay.
But preemptively, I would like to pick up some questions here.
Sure, absolutely.
And two of them. And the other questions I would say to our audience that you can just send it to your personal counselor. Each of our students have a personal counselor. And so you can send it to our personal counselor. Do it in English, please. And we make sure that Dr. Soren Ashmall will receive this question. I know that Dr. Soren Ashmall are very, very busy in the last days. But I also know that we would find some time to answer your email. Could you use your email to send these questions, or you would prefer another channel of communication?
If maybe you can, my preference would be to channel them through your diplomatic institute, because then they would come in together, and I can look for that, and I won't. What I would hate for is an email that I don't know, and somehow it for whatever reason, and it wouldn't be me doing this, but it would end up going into spam or a folder, and then I gets lost, and then they're like, oh, the guy didn't even answer my question. Whereas if I know it's coming from your diplomatic institute, that I will definitely make time to do it as quickly as I possibly can. And I think that when folks are becoming and learning to become diplomats, that's the spot where, no matter kind of how you feel about the world, that's where hopefully you're more open to thinking about things in as many ways as possible, so that we hopefully avoid wars. And having been in them, if I have to do them, I will do them, and I will do them as effectively as I have to and as powerfully as I have to. But it is the failure of diplomacy. It's the failure of everything else that's occurred in life. And then you really are in what I called initially the ugly underbelly of the world. It's ugly. It's just a nasty thing. It's something that is horrific.
Thank you, Soren. So our audience, please, dear students, comrades, please just send it to your personal counselor, conselheiro individual, and your personal counselor will use his institutional email and send it to you. So you're going to see Instituto Diplomacia .com.br. So thank you. I do appreciate, on behalf of our students, I do appreciate your sense of cooperation and generosity.
Thank you very much for having me. And hopefully I answered your questions. And if I didn't answer them as well as you might have hoped, please, send more questions in, and I'll try to get back. And I hope one day to see, each and every one of you here in the United States, or if I'm able to finally make that trip that I keep promising, your president here, that I will make to Brazil. Hopefully I'll be able to meet some of you. And please, if for some reason you see me somewhere, do not be shy. Please let me know. Hey, I was on that class and I heard you and I disagreed with everything you said. And I'll be fine with that because I love differences of opinion.
Okay, I'm very sorry that I know that many of our audience and students would have quite more questions to ask. Myself, I had my questions to ask, but I would say that, Soren, thank you for your time. Thank you for your practical answers. And I would like to address my audience by saying that this is part of a future diplomat experience. We till now have been using books, scholars teaching you, but when you go through the real ground of diplomacy, the counterpart is gonna be foreigner counterpart with foreign and sometimes non-expected point of view, and that not share even the cultural way of providing their opinions, and being whatever, being them a scholar, a military member, a military, whatever. The fact is that the Instituto Diplomacia planning to have at least once a month this master talk using the three foreign language that is demanded from our candidates: English, Spanish, and French. So we're going to do this master talk once a month at least. And Dr. Soren Ashmall brilliantly opened this program. And so I would say, Soren, it's my plan to make your promise of coming to Brazil a reality. I'm already talking to some diplomats, friends of mine, some universities, and I hope that as soon as possible, we can find a way of having you in Brazil. And that said, thank you all, any student or not a student of the Instituto Diplomacia who had attended to this first master talk. And for those preparing for a diplomatic career, and that is I'm going to give you 2 minutes to answer. Sorry, it's the last question. For those preparing for a diplomatic career, what should be taken from tonight's master talk?
I would say enjoy the fact that there are such different opinions around the world from your own. Really, they have different perspectives, different opinions, and do not, just because it doesn't match what you think, please take it in and consider it and use it to broaden your understanding and your own knowledge of all the people in the world and all their different perspectives. And if you're able to do that all through your career, not just in the beginning, you're going to have your life, your personal life, yet alone your professional life, will be deeply enriched. And I really believe that, because you'll all of a sudden start to at least understand the other point of view, even if it doesn't match your own.
Thank you, Soren. This
Thank you.
concludes today's Master Talk, an initiative of Instituto Diplomacia. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to continue this conversation in our next edition.